professor, physician, epidemiologist. I am Dr. Sri Banerjee. Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Sri Banerjee, core faculty for the College of Health Sciences and Public Policy at Walden University with a joint faculty position at Ross University School of Medicine. And specifically here, I'm going to be talking about understanding how to conduct quality literature reviews in the field of medicine. This, of course, is specifically what should I should say it like this. While there are similarities between medicine and other fields, for instance, public health, health policy, public policy, nursing, and other areas that have a rich tradition of conducting research, primary research. But then there's kind of a misalignment between how literature reviews are conducted in various types of disciplines. So here today, what I'm trying to do is sort out how some of these literature reviews vary according to discipline, and just some pointers about how to conduct a nice, cohesive literature review. This is one area that you can never get enough training in. There's a lot of different considerations to be made. And the reason I like this article, it's a bit dated, but I like this article better is because it goes into some of these complex discussions. And so, despite a rapid growth in journals, there's a failure to conduct a thorough, accurate, and up-to-date literature review, identifying an important problem. And this I've seen to be true in newer scholars versus and in scholars that have been in the field for a long time. So understanding the goals of the literature review, why you're writing it, and following a few basic processes can enhance the writing. So medical education, in medical education, no organization has articulated a formal definition of a literature review. But there are some key points that help to formulate the literature review, and that is the literature review is the basis for high-quality medical education research and helps maximize relevance, originality, generalizability, and impact. The literature review provides context, informs methodology, maximizes innovation, and avoids duplicative research. So if somebody has already done the research, you shouldn't do it again. Now, there's a caveat to that, and I want to go into this a little bit before proceeding to the next key point. And that is that many students and many new scholars think that they have to, and I was in the same boat when I was going through this, is that you have to completely reinvent the wheel and come up with something completely original to the point that you may have a lofty goal like curing cancer. But that's not the intention. You can have a research gap simply based on the fact that the study is being conducted in a different location. And this is where your creativity is exercised, because then you can, and this is my tips that I'm providing from experience, is that then you can visit that study and take a look at how it was done, and then replicate that study maybe in a different data set, maybe in a different scenario, context, location, just vary something even a little, and the effects you can then compare with the previous study. Now, there might be a certain type of study that has been conducted many times in many different places, then the generalizability has already been established. But if it's one cohort that a phenomenon has been established in, then you want to duplicate that in other settings, because you have no way of knowing if the same parameters apply to a different geographic location or time period or whatever it is that you're trying to vary. Now, looking at the literature review, it takes time, it's iterative, a lot of patience, should continue throughout the research process. So as you're conducting research, revisit the literature review. Take a look where you can make improvements. This is something that's done when you're writing a scholarly journal article. Researchers should maximize the use of librarians, colleagues, search tools, databases, search engines, existing literature, related articles. So you may have access to all of these resources, but not utilizing them effectively, or just using them minimally. And so you want to make sure that you're conducting literature reviews that are comprehensive. And then finally, of course, keeping organized is critical, and there's multiple search engines and multiple places for such as Zotero or others where you can maintain a list of references and resources, and then even convert. Here's another plug. I actually recommend that you use a reference citation manager, and I've talked about this in different places, to be able to easily convert between one system and another in terms of referencing systems. So the main type of referencing style that is used in medicine is the American Medical Association, AMA. New England Journal of Medicine, Journal of American Medical Association, and some of the top tier journals use AMA. Now, with that said, that's not a hard and fast rule. There are, in fact, from all the journal writing that I've done, I would argue that there are journal-specific styles. Of course, you have Chicago, you have Harvard style, which actually is used ironically in England, although Harvard University is here. And then you have APA and others. But what I was stunned at seeing is the fact that within the context of specific journals, there is actually style requirements for that specific journal, and it doesn't apply to any other journal. And that was striking to me. But Zotero has solutions for every journal, so you can actually go through a list of all the journals that Zotero covers, and if you don't have that specific style, then more than likely you can download that and then add it to your list of referencing styles. So that was a tangent on reference citation managers. Use them. Journal articles, we have kind of a slant against journalist conversation, but in a way it is, because it's a way of understanding how one's research fits into the larger medical education conversation. One way to think about it is, imagine yourself joining a conversation at a social event after you hang about eavesdropping to get the drift of what's being said. The conversational equivalent of the literature review. So that's compared to eavesdropping in this example. You join the conversation with a contribution that signals your shared interest in the topic. So you've done the eavesdropping, you've done your homework, now it's time to join into the conversation, and contribute, and show things that will interest the individual. And then your knowledge of what's already been said, and your intention, it can be voiced and expressed, because then you can focus on that, focus on your knowledge of what's already been said, and then from that understand your intention. So what you're doing, another analogy which I actually think is very accurate, is it allows you to join the conversation. This is the first time I'm seeing this, but definitely a very important way to describe this. So joining the conversation, but through the provision of context, information, methodology, informed methodology, identifying innovation, and minimizing duplicative research, and ensuring that professional standards are met. So there's minimum standards, rubric guides that we use at Walden University, but then these can be used in different ways. What else does understanding current literature do? Well, it promotes more scholarship. And actually, one of the researchers, Boyer, said that there are 5 or 6 standards by which scholarly work should be evaluated. And I've actually presented quite a few models like this, but I'm going to tell you about this one as well. The review helps. So what does the review actually do? So a good review should help articulate clear goals, show evidence of adequate preparation, select appropriate methods, and I would say that the methodology is more so explained in the method section, but communicating relevant results and engaging in reflective critique. So this is actually not just the literature review portion, but this can actually be the rest of the paper as well. But when you're thinking about the literature review, you're thinking in terms of what already exists. So although this may look like what is required in an actual paper, in reality what is going on is the researcher is showing evidence of adequate preparation and selecting appropriate methodology from existing literature. So look for methodology that other authors have used in the past, and how they've communicated the results, and then reflect on all of the literature in a critical manner. If you don't, then there's several problems that you will run into if you don't perform a high quality literature review. And if it's methodologically weak, studies that are repetitive, not grounded in theory, that's a problem. So table 1 shows different ways that different journals have provided guidance on how to approach literature reviews. So the Journal of Graduate Medical Education, of course, this is a journal. This is the journal that I'm reading this article from, so it's listed first. A brief summary of the importance and relevance to JGME readers. Concise literature review highlighting the evidence gaps the study will attempt to answer, and clear hypothesis or question. So there it is. There you have it. You have to understand the evidence gaps. Now in medical education, what they're saying is a bit different because they're adding the idea of the conceptual framework, and I would argue that it's in some journals more important than others. And you want to align with what is the journal standards, and not break ranks too much, because if you do, then your paper gets rejected. So The introduction should include a strong conceptual framework that indicates how publication of the paper can be expected to fill a gap in knowledge that is important for the field to fill. So the context of the work and your choice of methods must be made clear. So this is kind of a different approach, although the gap is still there, the gap in knowledge, but understanding a conceptual framework and how this is important in explaining findings. So that is how some of these literature reviews should look. There's others, for instance, academic medicine. There's general research parameters. The study addresses a serious challenge facing the academic medicine community. The study critically reviews the scholarly literature. So if there's a challenge facing the academic medicine community, for instance, how to impute social determinants, or how to better interact physician-patient communication. The other ones, talk about advances in health sciences education. Now, theirs is the perspective of external validity. So it's critical that authors place their study in a theoretical and empirical context. So this is very much kind of open and shut. There's no page limit in order that each paper can be accompanied by a critical review of related research, and the discussion can highlight how the study findings add to knowledge. And then Journal of Continuing Education in the Health Professions. Submissions should be scholarly, demonstrate that they build upon and extend the existing empirical and or theoretical literature. Identify an educational problem or issue addressed by the study and offer a successful argument establishing the importance to the field of addressing the problem. So here what you're doing is you're establishing the importance to the field of addressing that problem or issue by explaining why readers will want to read the article. Now I'm not going to read through all of these. There's BMC Medical Education, Perspectives on Medical Education, and Medical Teacher. So these are all journal sites where you can kind of present your findings on innovative sort of curricular development. And then here's common problem areas for reporting literature reviews in the context of scholarly articles. And one thing that I wanted to add to this is null findings or negative findings are oftentimes rejected in journal articles. And a lot of times that will lead to publication bias when you're doing a literature review and meta-analysis, and usually is stated within the limitations of the meta-analysis. So I wanted to add that, and I think it's important that we also not only be aware of this, but there's actually journals that are devoted to publishing those studies where null hypothesis was not rejected. So you failed to reject the null hypothesis. So that's one. But looking at common problem areas, citations are too old, and I see this too often, usually in the last 5 years. More than 10 years is a complete no-no. Study results are not discussed in the context of current literature, theory, and evidence, so you can't generalize the impact. If it's, say for instance, this is the year 2022, which as of this recording it is, and you're looking at a paper from the 80s, and I've seen this before. The same theories don't apply anymore. Many things have changed, realities have changed. So now you're dealing with, if you have Now, if it's a seminal article, that's different. That's a different story. But when you're talking about just study results, you have to base it or ground it in current literature. So citing potential solution, citing old references only for seminal paradigm shifting studies. Rare case that relevant contemporary studies are unavailable. State the reference age and indicate the reason for citing, and then cite contemporary work and discuss how older and newer studies together inform current research. And so that's something that's done, maybe a classic study and then combining it with an updated modern study. Now, how many citations are too few versus too many? That's the Goldilocks principle, because you're thinking about when you have too few studies, that's inadequate context. You can't draw any conclusions based off of that. And also, there's not too many opportunities for the work to be cited and disseminated if you have too few studies. Now, because at the end of the day, what's happening is that when you cite an author's article, they get a notification, and so they get the statistics as to how many times their article was cited. And so it's actually, regardless of what it may seem like, it's actually a network of knowledge formation and knowledge building, because all of the citations then lead to similar articles being presented, and the person that's conducting the literature review, similar articles can quickly be amassed in this manner. What am I talking about? I can give you a more specific example. When you're, for instance, looking at a journal article, and in here, and I'm going to give you the example of scholar.google.com. And then when you're, say you're doing a search on cardiovascular disease, I'm just going to give you an example here. What you see here, and there's a couple of things that you can do here, and you can take a look and see what's full text available, and the first 4 journals have full text available, and you can take a look at that. But what you actually want to do, I mean, these may be seminal articles, and how can you tell that which are seminal, which are not? Is because when you have an article which is from about 20 years old, in the New England Journal of Medicine, but then cited by about 1,200 people, then you know it has importance, and this can be your justification then for adding this more dated article. But then when you're looking for now more recent articles, what you want to do is, and I'm going to shift the window view over, and you actually want to select, and this is what I select since 2018. And then let's shift over the window one more time, and now look at all of the more recent articles. And now when you look at 2020 and you have about 900 citations from this, cardiovascular disease and COVID-19, then you know this is an important article. So if you're writing on cardiovascular disease, you have to include this. So there's different ways. Again, this cardiovascular disease, drug therapy, and COVID-19. Now, if you're not writing on COVID-19, you might want to think about. But I think this is something. The pandemic is something that is, in at least the area of chronic diseases, something that must be considered if we're to think about chronic diseases. So going back to the article that we started off with, I think it's important to note that mapping out information that readers need to understand in your paper and selecting the highest yield references is key. And so including the following types of references: those that illustrate core background theoretical and methodological concepts, groundbreaking, paradigm shifting papers, recent relevant studies, society position, policy statements. Then include these. Read articles of a similar type for the journal to which you are submitting to get a sense for the usual number of references. And this is actually a very good suggestion, because the best way to understand every journal, trust me on this, every journal has its own language. And when you enter the portal for any journal, there's a guideline for authors, and you click on that. This is the very first page I visit, and it extensively and explicitly states what are the expectations of the paper. But a lot of times that's not enough. You actually have to pull up a journal article to be able to see all of it in one place. And for me, I have to go into another journal article. The other advantage of looking at other articles is, and this is actually a pointer which people don't talk about, but from experience I've known this, is that your article is more likely to be published in a journal where you have cited articles that have previously come from that same journal. And how does that help? Well, it helps the journal become more known through your publication. And so indirectly, this is telling the editor that you have a lot of interest in that journal. So this is one way that you can kind of understand what is the what are the expectations of the journal, and then comply accordingly. So I'm just going to quickly wrap this talk up, because it's going into a lot of different things, and I want to make sure that it's concise as well. So the most extreme or hyperbolic studies are the only studies cited. So if you have only sensational articles or ones that kind of make extreme claims or inaccurate claims in order to attract readers' attention, then this can turn into misinformation. And sometimes I'll see studies where smaller kind of significance is enhanced in a way that it seems more, but in fact it's not. And studies conflicting with the author's findings are intentionally not cited. That's an intentional exclusion of conflicting articles. That's definitely not something that even is ethical. However, with that said, I think it is important to look at similar studies and compare your findings with other studies, and see if there's any differences, and explain why you thought your findings were different than the study that was done. And this could be done just by changing one simple parameter within another study. So to avoid this, identify and discuss the studies with results that conflict with your study. Compare and contrast what I just went over. Those studies with their other studies. Ideas are inappropriately attributed. The next one, I'm looking at this one now. And if when it's inappropriately attributed, then it's just conflicting. And so a lot of times you want to contact the author. I've done this before using any sort of information or figure or anything else. And then secondary literature, there's reviews, commentaries, editorials, other studies citing primary literature are oversighted. So secondary literature is oversighted, not enough is looking into primary studies. Now, when I'm talking about secondary literature, I'm not talking about secondary data analysis. That's different. That is completely fine. But when you're talking about secondary literature, this brings up another important point: is that literature doesn't always your contribution to scholarly work doesn't always have to be looking in the form of a whole academic journal. There's research briefs, there's reviews, there's commentaries, there's editorials. In fact, one of the studies that I published with my co-author about diabetes and cardiorenal syndrome, I called it the triple threat, and I published it with my chair at the time, Dr. Ray Panis. And in that, what happened was we actually published the study, and then at the end of the year, another scholar actually explained the study through a research brief. So what it did is, on the first level, allowed us to present our findings, but then somebody else was able to reinterpret those findings in a different way and present it in a more concise manner. And this just allowed for much more publicity for that article. Author's own work is oversighted, and sometimes when you have 95 articles out there, then you oftentimes want to cite yourself, but then you're not allowing other perspectives to be included. And so citing your own work, as long as it's clearly relevant, but limiting citations of your own work to references relevant to rationale, methodology, and interpretation of results. So you don't want to be citing your own self and methodology or context or background. Some areas you're good. For instance, if you're in the discussion and you want to say this was previously studied by yourself and colleagues, and you can kind of use some of that, but oversighting is not ever ideal. Clearly indicate when citing your own work. Discuss studies that conflict with your prior work. A laundry list of studies is provided without adequate synthesis, and this is something I've seen many times. When you're first looking to, and so I won't need to focus on this, but when you're first looking to create a study, this is a problem because you're actually overwhelmed by a lot of articles and you don't know where to stop. So the best way to do this is ask colleagues to review your outline and manuscript prior to writing. Outline the results of your literature search along with key points to be discussed. I oftentimes tell students to look at key themes. What are some main ideas that are emerging from as you're doing the search? And what is interesting about Zotero, and I can. So what's interesting about Zotero is that when you have a collection of articles, they will automatically create a number of words, and so those words can be used to put together themes that are emerging out of your literature review. Discussion of literature review is overly long, so if you're not really getting to the point and kind of going over many tangents, then it turns into superfluous sections, repetitive, or just too dilute. And then finally, literature review lacks structure, organization, and some of this actually goes back from the previous topic. Discussion of literature review is overly long. So carefully outline the literature that you want to discuss and ask colleagues within and outside. So this is similar to the last one. Search strategies are even in here, so they've included everything. And combining author names when you need to. These are just 4 pointers that they have provided. Here's box information resources. So PubMed, Web of Science, Education Resource Information Center, ERIC, CINAHL, Cumulative Index of Nursing and Allied Health, Scopus, Psych Info, and then Google Scholar. And again, what I was telling you about, this is the complete list of citation managers. Zotero is the one I talked about, but then there's EndNote, RefWorks, Mendeley, and Papers. Knowing when to say when. Researchers often ask how to know when they have located enough citations. Unfortunately, there's no magic or ideal number of citations to collect. One way to check if you've covered the literature is to inspect references of relevant articles. So if some of the similar articles with your research idea have covered similar articles, then you know you're on the right track. As researchers review references, they will start noticing a repetition of the same articles with few new articles appearing. This can indicate that the researcher has covered the literature based on a particular topic. So just putting it all together is known as, in the journal Perspectives on Medical Education, it's known as the writer's craft, which is intended to help medical educators improve their writing. This was a while back. So this goes into about 17 references, and you can go through this in more detail, but these are the main highlights of this article. Thank you for listening.